We live in an age of abundance. We have access to everything: information, comfort, entertainment, technology, connection. And yet, we've never felt so tired, so lost, so empty. Why is it that even with everything at our fingertips, something still feels missing? Why do so many people wake up each day feeling like they're just surviving, not really living? The answer might lie in what we've left behind. Silence, time, the sacred, others, and maybe ourselves. Philosophy has words for this: nihilism, alienation, boredom, the loss of meaning in existence. In this video, we'll explore the danger of existential emptiness in modern life through 25 powerful, philosophical ideas that span centuries, and that today, more than ever, need to be heard. Get ready for a deep journey, maybe uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. We live in a time where everything seems possible, but nothing ever feels like enough. Technology connects us to the whole world. Consumerism promises instant happiness. Progress appears limitless. And yet, a question keeps returning. In the middle of sleepless nights, in the silence of everyday moments, why live? What does any of this mean? That's where the philosophy of Albert Camus comes in. He invites us to face one of the most uncomfortable truths about existence. Life is absurd. Camus defines the absurd as the clash between our deep desire for meaning and the universe's cold indifference. We want purpose. We crave fairness, love, and something eternal. But the world remains silent. There's no guarantee we're here for a reason. No proof that our suffering has meaning. As Camus says, the universe is deaf to our cry for meaning, and that conflict is where the absurd is born. But this isn't some cold, abstract theory. We feel the absurd every day. In the emptiness we feel even after achieving our goals, in the sense that we're living on autopilot, in the quiet discomfort of not knowing why we do what we do. Modern life only makes this worse. It keeps us busy, distracted, and overloaded with options, but rarely gives us a real reason why. Camus starts from this brutal realization and asks a bold question. If life is absurd, is it still worth living? Surprisingly, his answer is yes, but not out of resignation or blind hope. Camus says the answer is an act of rebellion. Recognizing that life has no built-in meaning doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing to live more consciously, more freely, and more intensely. The absurd is not the end. It's the beginning of true freedom. According to Camus, we have three paths in the face of the absurd. Physical suicide, ending life to escape the question. He rejects this. Philosophical suicide, clinging to comforting beliefs with no real foundation, inventing a fake meaning to avoid the void. He rejects this too. Absurd rebellion, saying yes to life without needing it to make sense. That third option is the one Camus chooses. It's about living with clear eyes, knowing there are no final answers, and creating freedom because of that fact, not in spite of it. Camus sees this clearly in the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to push a heavy rock up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, forever. A pointless, endless task. But Camus ends his work with a powerful line. We must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus accepts his reality and chooses to face it. He doesn't beg for salvation. He doesn't pretend. He takes control of his fate through acceptance, and that's what makes him free. In modern life, we all push our own rocks. Work, expectations, social media, endless responsibilities. It often feels like every day starts over from scratch. But Camus invites us to look at it differently. Lucid awareness of the absurd can free us from numbness and apathy. When we accept that meaning isn't handed to us, we finally get to create it ourselves. We can love, create, laugh, and fight, not because the universe commands it, but because we are human. Camus doesn't give us feel-good answers. He He doesn't say meaning will come if you search long enough. In fact, he says the opposite. Meaning might never come. And yet, we can still live with dignity. We can still choose love, even though love is fleeting. We can still create, even knowing everything fades. We can wake up each day, look at the world, and say, I know you don't care, but I do. I'm here. I'm alive. And I choose to keep going. That's what Camus calls absurd rebellion. It's not screaming into the void. It's dancing in it. It's laughing, fully aware of reality. It's turning life into art, even if there's no applause. Camus offers us an ethic of courage. Don't wait for meaning from above. Build your own reason to keep going, day by day. He invites us to become artists of our own existence. And deep down, there's something beautifully human in that. We're not gods. We don't have all the answers, but we do have something the universe doesn't. Consciousness, imagination, freedom. We can turn the absurd into style. We can turn struggle into strength. Like Sisyphus, we can keep pushing the rock, but this time with a quiet smile on our face, knowing that despite everything, we are alive. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you used to believe in, God, morality, truth, purpose, no longer holds any real weight or authority in your life. It's like the ground beneath your feet has collapsed. That's exactly what Nietzsche predicted with almost prophetic accuracy. The collapse of traditional values and the deep emptiness that would follow. This is modern nihilism. And it's not just a philosophical concept. It's a lived experience that touches the lives of millions today. Nietzsche wrote, "God is dead, and we have killed him." It's one of the most misunderstood quotes in all of philosophy. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating the death of God. He was diagnosing a spiritual crisis. With God gone, so are absolute moral foundations, objective truths, and transcendent meanings that once gave life structure and direction. Modernity, driven by reason, science, and secularism, has dismantled those foundations, but it hasn't replaced them with anything strong enough to take their place. Nietzsche saw Western civilization heading toward a void, a place where the old values were thrown away, but no new ones were powerful enough to fill the gap. That's where nihilism is born. The realization that there's no ultimate purpose, that things are essentially empty, that what used to be sacred now feels meaningless. Modern life, according to Nietzsche, only makes this worse. Society has become more technical, bureaucratic, and industrialized. Human beings have been reduced to consumers, workers, producers, no longer creators of meaning. The pursuit of comfort has replaced the pursuit of depth. We live to avoid pain, to feel secure, not to live with passion or intensity. And the result? A flat, lifeless existence with no risk, no purpose, no greatness. Nietzsche calls this condition the rise of the last man. This figure is the symbol of modern humanity. Someone who only cares about comfort, pleasure, safety, and entertainment. He avoids pain at all costs. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't fight for anything. He just exists. And Nietzsche despises this figure. Because the last man represents the peak of passive nihilism, the acceptance of emptiness as the norm. But Nietzsche doesn't stop there. He's not a philosopher of despair. He's a philosopher of transition. To him, nihilism is a necessary stage. It's the moment when old illusions fall away. Yes, it's painful, but it's also liberating. When faced with courage, nihilism can become the gateway to a new kind of life. Nietzsche's proposal is radical. Create new values. Take full responsibility for living without transcendent guarantees. That takes a rare kind of strength, what he calls the will to power, a creative and affirming force that turns emptiness into possibility. The person capable of doing this is what he calls the Übermensch, the overman or superhuman, not someone superior in an arrogant way, but someone who lives like a living work of art, someone who affirms life in all its complexity without needing metaphysical crutches. Modern nihilism affects us so deeply because we were raised to believe life had a ready-made meaning. We were told there's a moral order, a destiny, a greater good. When that all crumbles, the impact is existential. But Nietzsche invites us to see that collapse not as a tragic end, but as a beginning. A hard beginning, yes, but a real one. A moment when we can finally ask, what do I want to stand for with my life? Maybe the emptiness we feel today isn't just a sign of decline. Maybe it's an opening. When the old values fall, there's space to reinvent meaning. But that reinvention won't come from outside. It won't come from traditional religion, or political ideology, or consumer culture. It has to come from within. From the individual, from the courage to stare into the abyss without looking away, from the ability to turn that gaze into creation. Nietzsche doesn't offer easy answers. He doesn't give tips or recipes for happiness. What he does is more powerful. He provokes, he touches wounds, he forces the reader to move, to think, to take ownership of their own life. His entire philosophy is a kind of education in freedom, and that's exactly what modern life lacks the most: inner freedom. The freedom to be, to create, to live with intensity without masks. If modern nihilism makes us anxious, maybe it's because we're in the middle of a transition. A transition Nietzsche saw long before the rest of us. The challenge is to go through it without falling into despair, but also without clinging to false hopes. The challenge is to become worthy of our own suffering and worthy of our own freedom. We live surrounded by constant stimulation. One click takes us to a new image, a new song, a new video. We have access to food, entertainment, comfort, and distraction like no generation before us ever did. And yet, boredom still lingers. Modern life, instead of freeing us from it, seems to have pulled us deeper into it. For Schopenhauer, that wouldn't be a surprise, because to him, boredom isn't a flaw of modern times. It's the very essence of the human condition. Schopenhauer believed that life is driven by a blind, irrational force, the will. This will shows up in every living being as a constant urge to exist, to want, to pursue. Humans, being conscious of this, suffer even more. We're always wanting something. When we get it, we feel brief relief, but soon a new desire shows up, and when there's nothing left to want, boredom creeps in. That heavy, empty feeling where time feels pointless and existence feels dull. He once wrote that, "Life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Pain comes when we want something and don't get it. Boredom comes when we do get it and realize there's nothing left to chase." In this cycle, peace never really arrives. We live suspended between frustration and dissatisfaction. And worse, the more comfort and abundance we have, the faster we run out of things to want, and the quicker we fall into boredom. Modern life seems to have made that even worse. We've created a society that tries to eliminate discomfort, pain, and waiting. Everything is available instantly. We don't even need to leave the house to be entertained, to shop, or to socialize. But this ease hasn't brought us lasting satisfaction. Instead, it's created a kind of emotional numbness. We get bored with everything, fast. Nothing feels deep enough. Nothing feels truly new. Modern boredom is sneaky. It doesn't look like having nothing to do. It looks like having too much to do, and none of it matters. How often do you find yourself jumping from one app to another, not even sure what you're looking for? How many times have you watched videos, read posts, replied to messages, and still felt a strange emptiness? That's the boredom Schopenhauer talked about. It's not the absence of activity. It's the absence of meaning in the activity. According to him, the problem is in the very nature of will. It's never satisfied. So life becomes this endless chase for goals that, even when reached, let us down. The happiness we expect never arrives the way we imagined. And when that hope runs dry, we're just left with time. And that's when boredom hits hardest, because it forces us to face the absurdity of existing without anything left to want. Modern abundance made this crisis even worse. It promised to fill the void with comfort and consumption. But like Schopenhauer predicted, it just made the dissatisfaction cycle spin faster. What used to be rare and exciting is now ordinary. What used to be an achievement is now an expectation. We're bombarded with images of pleasure, success, and adventure. But instead of satisfying us, they just remind us how dull our own lives feel by comparison. Boredom also shows up in our obsession with performance. We're taught that we have to be productive all the time, working, improving, creating. But that non-stop pace is exactly what pulls us away from anything meaningful. We become machines that do and forget how to simply be. When we stop, the silence feels unbearable because it brings up everything we try to avoid. The lack of meaning, the loneliness, the awareness that life is finite. Schopenhauer doesn't offer a feel-good solution to this. He's a philosopher of pessimism. He doesn't believe in historical, redemption, moral progress, or utopian futures. To him, life is suffering, and the best we can do is ease it through art, contemplation, and compassion. Art, especially, allows us to escape the tyranny of will, if only for a moment. When we experience true beauty, we forget to desire. We just exist. And that, for a moment, is enough. This view may seem bleak, but there's a rare honesty in it. Instead of denying boredom, Schopenhauer invites us to face it, to see it as a symptom of our deepest nature. And by doing so, maybe we can deal with it more consciously. Maybe we can accept that life doesn't owe us constant entertainment. That emptiness doesn't have to be feared. It can be inhabited with presence. So here's the real question. What do we do when the noise of modern life stops? When there are no more notifications, no more tasks, no more goals? Can we stand to be alone with ourselves? Or do we run to the next distraction? Modern boredom challenges us to rethink how we live. It shows us that more isn't the solution to emptiness. It just hides it for a while. Schopenhauer teaches us that life will always involve dissatisfaction. But he also reminds us there's beauty in accepting that truth. That there's wisdom in realizing not everything needs to be fixed. Some feelings just need to be understood. Maybe boredom, when welcomed, can teach us to want less, to observe more, to exist more peacefully. And maybe, just maybe, it reminds us that silence, uncomfortable as it is still more real than any loud distraction. We live in an age of material abundance but deep spiritual emptiness. We have access to everything: information, comfort, freedom of choice. But in the middle of so many options, many people feel lost. Not because there's nothing to choose from, but because they have no direction. It's like being in the middle of the ocean with a fast boat and no destination in sight. That exact emptiness is what Viktor Frankl identified as the great struggle of modern life, the absence of existential purpose. Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and survivor of Nazi concentration camps, built his therapeutic approach on one powerful belief: humans can endure almost any suffering as long as they have a reason. He who has a why can bear almost any how, he wrote, echoing Nietzsche. In his most famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl doesn't just describe his time in the camps. He explains how losing a sense of meaning was often more deadly than physical pain. According to Frankl, modern life brings a cruel paradox. We've never had more freedom to choose what to be, what to do, what to buy, what to experience. But when that freedom isn't connected to purpose, it turns into anxiety. We've taken away the traditional sources of meaning: God, religion, nation, family, community, but we haven't replaced them with anything equally strong. What's left is a growing inner emptiness, a sense that we're living, but we don't know why. Frankl called this the existential vacuum, and he noticed how it shows up in subtle but real ways: chronic boredom, a sense of uselessness, nameless anxiety, silent depression. Life starts to lose its backbone. We keep moving, working, doing, living. But there's always a shadow in the background asking, quietly, so what? Unlike many modern thinkers, Frankl didn't believe humans were just driven by instincts or desires. He saw us as beings who seek meaning. And that search isn't a luxury, it's a deep human need. When we lose our sense of why, we suffer. Not just emotionally, but physically too. The body starts to reflect the weight of a life that's missing something essential. Modern society, focused on efficiency, productivity, and instant pleasure, has forgotten how to feed the soul. Everything has become fast, shallow, and transactional. Even human relationships have been reduced to algorithms. And when meaning becomes optional, or worse, ignored, what's left is an empty routine, no matter how comfortable it seems on the outside. Frankl offered a radically human response to this emptiness. He believed meaning isn't something we invent out of thin air. It's something we discover. Each person has a unique calling, a personal mission, a why that only they can fulfill. That meaning doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. It could be found in caring for someone, doing a job with love, or facing pain with dignity. Meaning is born where our lives meet responsibility. That word, responsibility, is central in Frankl's philosophy. He believed freedom isn't just the power to choose anything. It's the power to choose with meaning, the power to respond to life. We're not passive victims of fate or puppets of circumstance. Even in the worst situations, we can still choose our attitude, and in that choice lies our real strength. To Frankl, the meaning of life isn't one size fits all. It changes from person to person, from moment to moment. That's why he said, life is the one asking the questions, not us. The task isn't to ask, what is the meaning of life? But instead, what meaning is life asking from me right now? That shift in perspective is powerful. It moves us from being spectators to becoming the authors of our story. Life doesn't owe us a ready-made purpose. It's up to us to respond with honesty and courage. The crisis of meaning in today's world comes, in part, from forgetting this truth. We've been taught to chase success, money, recognition, pleasure, but rarely are we taught about vocation, commitment, or serving others as a path to real fulfillment. And often, that's where true meaning is found. When we step outside ourselves, when we connect with something bigger, when we live for more than just our ego. Frankl also warned of a dangerous risk. When meaning isn't found, it's replaced, and what replaces it is usually destructive. Some numb themselves with drugs, alcohol, endless distractions. Others fall into compulsive, obsessive, even self-destructive behaviors. And some, trapped in nihilism, give up on life inwardly. They keep existing, but their soul has checked out. Frankl's message is both simple and deep. Find your why. It doesn't have to come from a deep philosophy or a spiritual revelation. Sometimes it's in a small act of kindness, in a decision made with integrity, in a quiet commitment to a person or a cause. Meaning is found wherever there is truth and presence, where there is love. Modern life may have erased the old sources of meaning, but that doesn't mean we're doomed to emptiness. It just means the path is now more personal, more difficult, and more real. The meaning of your life isn't hiding in a sacred book, or on social media, or in a promise of success. It's in you, and it's in what you choose to do with the time you've been given. There are thinkers who try to comfort human suffering. Others try to overcome it. Emile Cioran doesn't belong to either group. His philosophy begins with the rawest and deepest discomfort. The idea that to live, to think, to exist consciously is, in itself, an almost unbearable burden. For him, consciousness wasn't a gift. It was a curse. And the more aware we become, the further we drift from the peace that ignorance can bring. Modern life, with its obsession with awareness analysis, and understanding everything only makes this discomfort worse, all while erasing any hope of transcendence. Cioran was born in Romania, lived most of his life in France, and wrote like someone bleeding in silence. His books aren't structured philosophical treatises, they're philosophical confessions. They're muffled cries from someone who feels too much and sees no way out. He didn't write to heal, he wrote to endure. For him, thinking was a way to survive his own thoughts. And surviving was itself a contradiction, an ironic act from someone who no longer believed in life, but still woke up every day. To Cioran, consciousness is the root of all human suffering. Animals don't suffer in the same way because they don't reflect on their own existence. They don't worry about time, death, or the meaning of it all. But humans, being self-aware, carry a crushing burden. We know we're going to die. We know everything is temporary. We know everything we love is fragile. And most of all, we know life offers no guarantee of meaning. In that sense, clarity becomes a curse. This only gets worse in the modern world. We're surrounded by information, analysis, diagnosis. Everything is something to be examined. We're constantly bombarded by opinions, data, comparisons, and noise. Hyper-awareness has become the norm. We think too much, and yet we feel less and less connected to anything beyond our thoughts. Spirituality has been replaced by algorithms. Faith has turned into irony. Contemplation has been crushed by productivity. Everything has become surface. Cioran said that humans lost the privilege of unconsciousness. We carry the weight of knowing that nothing lasts, that no matter how hard we try, life slips through our fingers. And still, we keep ourselves busy, pretending we have purpose, creating distractions. But sometimes, silence returns, and with it, the void. Not just any emptiness, a metaphysical emptiness. One that can't be filled with things, or words, or likes. The lack of transcendence is at the core of modern anxiety. Cioran believed religion, even with all its dogmas, offered a kind of emotional support for the weight of existence, not because it was necessarily true, but because it gave suffering a symbolic meaning. It took pain out of chaos and placed it in a story. There was a reason behind it, even if invisible. But with the death of God, the same one Nietzsche declared, we lost that symbolic ground. And unlike Nietzsche, Cioran didn't see that as liberation. He saw it as collapse. Without transcendence, all that's left are moments, days, tasks, and the awareness that it's all fleeting, fragile, and uncertain. Modern life teaches us to value the now, but a now with no horizon can become suffocating. It's like being trapped in a room with all the lights on, seeing everything, understanding everything, and not being able to leave. Hyper-awareness in that sense becomes a kind of torture. And clarity, instead of freeing us, locks us inside the absurdity of it all. Cioran didn't offer solutions. He didn't try to fix anything. His philosophy is brutally honest. He didn't pretend there was a cure for what he felt. He wrote so he wouldn't go insane. And maybe that's why his words hit so hard, because he says what many people feel but can't put into words. That being alive hurts, that thinking too much can be unbearable, that having no faith in anything is its own kind of despair. And yet, there's a tragic beauty in his writing. Cioran turns despair into art. He transforms anxiety into style. His prose is almost musical, even when he's writing about death, boredom, or disgust. There's elegance in his suffering, a bitter but clear acceptance. And that clarity, even if it doesn't heal us, brings comfort in another way. It reminds us we're not alone. It shows that the pain of existence isn't just ours. It's a shared, often silent, but very real experience. Modern life, with all its promises of progress, happiness, and control, failed to prepare us for the vastness of our own emptiness. Cioran didn't ignore that emptiness. He lived in it. And he invites us to recognize it too, to stop running from pain with cheap distractions, to stop pretending everything is fine when it's not. He doesn't ask us to be happy. He asks us to be honest, and maybe deep down, that's the most powerful form of transcendence we have today. To accept the emptiness without illusion. To keep living with the knowledge that everything passes, and still go on. Not out of heroism, not out of faith, but out of a kind of tragic elegance. A quiet dignity in the face of the fall. A faint smile, even with a heavy heart. Chiran didn't believe in redemption, but paradoxically, his work redeems. It doesn't remove the pain, but it helps us name it. And sometimes, that's enough. We live surrounded by choices, offers, and new things. Every day there's something else to want, something that seems to be missing. We're constantly told, just one more product, one more experience, one more achievement, and then, maybe, you'll feel satisfied. But that moment never comes. As soon as we get what we wanted, the pleasure fades, and a new desire takes its place. It's like we're always chasing something that keeps slipping away. This endless cycle is at the heart of Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy. He was one of the first thinkers to point out that behind all human life is a blind, irrational, and never satisfied force. The will. Schopenhauer didn't see life as something rational or well organized. To him, reason is just a thin layer covering something much more primitive. The drive to exist, to want, to chase. This force, the will, is what really moves the world. It doesn't have a purpose or conscious direction. It just wants. It wants to keep going, to take, to consume. And for us humans, with our awareness, this will become even more painful. Because we feel it, but we can't truly control it. From the moment we're born, we're thrown into life as needy beings. We need food, shelter, safety, love. But even when we have all of that, we don't find peace. The will keeps pushing. We want more. We want things we didn't even know existed. And every time we achieve something, we get just a brief sense of relief until the next want shows up, then another, and another. Life, according to Schopenhauer, is a cycle of constant restlessness. When we don't get what we want, we suffer. And when we do get it, we get bored. There's never real peace. Modern life, with its focus on consumption and performance, has taken this cycle to the extreme. We've never had access to so many products, services, and stimuli. We're constantly connected to infinite showcases of desire. And yet, paradoxically, we've never felt so unsatisfied, because the more we feed the will, the more it grows. It's like throwing logs onto a fire that doesn't warm you. It just burns endlessly. This urge to constantly want isn't something we choose. It's built into us. To Schopenhauer, the will isn't something we have. It's what we are. Our bodies are the physical form of the will. Our minds serve our impulses. Even when we think we're making free choices, we're often just following desires we don't fully understand. In this view, freedom is very limited, and there's a cruel twist to all this. The more aware we become of how this system works, the harder it is to find real happiness, because we realize we're stuck in a game with no finish line, that every accomplishment is temporary, that every joy carries a seed of disappointment. And even knowing all that, we can't stop. The will keeps pushing. It keeps pulling us forward. It doesn't get satisfied. It just changes shape. Today, we live under the rule of the constant promise. The next thing will bring happiness. The next relationship. The next job. The next phone. The next trip. But in the end, it's just more food for the will. And when we reach those goals and still don't feel peace, we hit a wall. That's when the emptiness creeps in. And not knowing what to do with it, we try to fill it with more consumption, more distraction, more speed. Schopenhauer doesn't offer easy comfort. Instead, he gives us a deep understanding of the human condition. He believes that once we become aware of the will's nature, we can at least start to weaken its grip, not defeat it, but reduce its power. That doesn't mean we have to give up all desires or live like monks. It means we can develop a more contemplative attitude. We can seek moments where we stop wanting, through art, music, or quiet reflection. In those moments, the will goes quiet, even if just briefly, and we feel something close to peace. Aesthetics for Schopenhauer is a special path to freedom. When we look at a beautiful work of art, we stop desiring for a moment. We stop thinking about the future or reliving the past. We just exist in the now. And in that moment of what he called disinterestedness, we step outside the suffering caused by the will. It's a short break, but it shows us there's another way to exist. One that doesn't rely on always chasing or achieving. Another path, according to Schopenhauer, is compassion. When we realize that everyone is being driven by the same blind force, we start to feel a deeper empathy. We see in others the same struggle we face in ourselves. This softens us. It humanizes us. Compassion becomes an ethical choice, born from understanding that existence hurts for everyone. In a society that worships achievement, success, and fulfilled desires, Schopenhauer's philosophy feels like an antidote. He reminds us that endless wanting isn't a sign of life. It's a kind of prison. That unchecked consumption isn't freedom. It's obedience to a blind force we never chose. And maybe, just maybe, the real path lies in wanting less, in slowing down more, in realizing that peace doesn't come with the next achievement. It comes from stepping off the treadmill. There's a subtle but important difference between feeling pleasure and living well. And it's exactly that confusion that fuels much of our modern dissatisfaction. We're constantly encouraged to chase pleasure as if it were the same thing as happiness. Enjoy as much as possible, consume quickly, collect experiences. But this path, so widely promoted today, may actually be taking us further away from what Epicurus believed was essential for a good life: inner peace. Epicurus, a Greek philosopher from the 4th century BCE, didn't see pleasure the way we usually do today. He wasn't about indulgence, wild desires, or intense sensations. Quite the opposite. For him, real pleasure came from calm, tranquility, and lasting peace, freedom from unnecessary stress and pain. His whole philosophy was about learning how to live without fear or anxiety, and with genuine gratitude for the simple, real things in life. Modern society, though, seems to have turned pleasure into a product for fast consumption. Today, pleasure is measured by intensity, not depth. Eating something delicious, traveling to a trendy destination, buying something new. These all give us quick bursts of excitement, but those highs are usually followed by a return to restlessness. It might look exciting on the outside, but inside we're left with a constant feeling of emptiness. Epicurus would have called this a major mistake, confusing true pleasure with temporary stimulation. He actually broke down our desires into 3 types: natural and necessary, like food, rest, and health; natural but unnecessary, like fancy meals or luxury; neither natural nor necessary, like fame, status, and power. The first type brings real, lasting well-being. The others, just more anxiety. For Epicurus, wisdom means knowing the difference between what we truly need and what we think we need. The problem is, modern culture trains us to crave exactly what's most unstable. It sells us pleasure as an end goal, completely detached from balance or inner harmony. And when pleasure becomes a requirement, it stops being pleasure. It becomes pressure, a kind of hidden slavery that demands we always feel good, always be upbeat, always be satisfied, even when we're feeling empty inside. Instead of chasing everything, Epicurus invites us to pause, to observe, to choose with more intention. He deeply valued friendship, for example, as one of the purest sources of human joy. Not the performative kind we see on social media, but real connections, built on presence, listening, and honesty. He also found high forms of pleasure in free time, in nature, and in quiet reflection. Pleasures that don't need to be shown off or justified. They just are. Another core part of his philosophy is the idea of freedom from fear. Epicurus saw fear as one of the biggest sources of human suffering. Fear of pain, of death, of the gods, of the future. And he believed that most of those fears are based on false beliefs. About death, for instance, he said, "When it's here, we're not, and when we're here, it's not." That way of thinking doesn't erase mortality, but it helps change our relationship to it. It eases anxiety. It helps us live more fully in the present. That lightness, that clarity, Epicurus valued so deeply has gotten lost in all the noise of modern life. The search for pleasure has become a race instead of a path. And the more we try to fill the emptiness with stimulation, the further we get from real satisfaction. That deep sense of well-being, the kind that comes from balance, presence, and moderation, has been replaced by constant excitement that quickly burns out. There's one essential question that Epicurus asks us to consider. What do we really need to live well? Are we desiring things that were never truly ours to begin with? Are we chasing idealized versions of pleasure, while real well-being is waiting for us in silence, in simplicity, in restraint? Epicurus didn't reject pleasure. He just taught us how to refine it, to realize that not every pleasure brings peace, that not every thrill is good for us, that living well isn't about living intensely, it's about living clearly. And that takes courage. Courage to say no to excess, to choose less, to rediscover the joy in a simple meal, a real conversation, a day without rushing. When we look around and see so many people constantly connected, stimulated and busy, but still anxious, still empty, maybe it's time to go back to Epicurus's simple words, that the noblest pleasure is the one that doesn't hurt afterward. That real well-being can't be bought, it must be cultivated, and that a good life isn't made of grand moments, but of small, well-lived ones. In the end, the confusion between pleasure and well-being is what throws us off track, but it can be fixed. All it takes is learning to listen, not to what we're told we should want, but to what we actually feel. True pleasure, as Epicurus said, doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear it, we need to be quiet. The relief we feel after finally getting something we deeply wanted usually doesn't last as long as we expect. For a moment, it seems like the restlessness has finally faded, but soon after, often without us even realizing it, a new feeling creeps in, a bit of anxiety, a subtle emptiness, a quiet question, now what? That moment of achievement, which we thought would bring us peace, instead opens a door to a strange kind of inner confusion. Schopenhauer saw this process with brutal clarity. For him, that emptiness we feel after getting what we want isn't a mistake. It's part of who we are. Fulfilling a desire doesn't end the cycle, it just resets it. At the core of his philosophy is the idea that all living things are driven by a blind, irrational force called the will. This will is what pushes us to want, to chase, to achieve. It's not something we choose, it's something we are. We want things because it's in our very nature to want. But here's the problem. This will is never truly satisfied. Every time a desire is fulfilled, the tension that was driving us fades, and in its place, we often feel boredom, weariness, or an even deeper restlessness. It's as if existence itself is wired for constant dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer summed it up in a quote that still rings true today. Life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. When we want something we don't have, we suffer. From frustration, longing, and anxiety. When we finally get it, instead of lasting joy, we often feel stuck or disappointed. The pain of wanting becomes the boredom of having, and this cycle repeats itself endlessly, dressed up in new goals and ambitions. You can see this play out in everyday life, a dream job that loses its shine once we get it, a romantic relationship that turns heavy after the excitement fades, a new purchase that quickly becomes just another item sitting in our room. What once felt like the answer to our inner unease turns out to be just another stop on an endless loop. This isn't just frustrating, it's revealing. It shows that we might be trapped in a structure of desire that keeps us from ever feeling truly content. The problem isn't just with disappointment, it's also in the fulfillment itself. Satisfaction doesn't end the hunger. It just gives way to a new kind of emptiness. That space between one craving and the next is what Schopenhauer called existential emptiness, a quiet kind of suffering that's built into our condition. What makes his view so unsettling is its honesty. He doesn't try to sell us a feel-good solution or a guide to happiness. He simply holds up a mirror, and in that mirror, we see how often we pin our hopes on the next win, the next goal, always expecting it to bring peace. But it never really does. Modern life only makes this worse. Instead of pausing to ask why we feel so empty, we try to cover it up with more distractions, more goals, more noise, more consumption. We're taught to want things constantly, and so we suffer when we don't get what we want. And we suffer when we do, because it's never enough. And maybe it never will be. But Schopenhauer doesn't just leave us in despair. He points to two ways to soften this suffering: aesthetic, contemplation, and compassion. Through art, we can momentarily step outside the grip of the will, looking at a painting, listening to music, getting lost in a book. These moments let our minds stop chasing. We're just there. And in that disinterested state, as he called it, we get a rare kind of relief, the feeling of existing without needing to achieve anything, just being. Compassion, too, offers a way out of self-centered pain. When we see another person's suffering as similar to our own, we connect, we feel empathy, and that human connection pulls us out of isolation and into something deeper. It's not a cure, but it's a bridge. It makes the weight of existence a little more bearable. There's no easy hope in Schopenhauer's philosophy, but there is a kind of freedom in his honesty. When we finally realize that satisfying our desires won't bring lasting peace, we're free to change how we live, to stop living for the next big thing, to stop blaming ourselves for feeling empty after we get what we thought we wanted. That emptiness isn't a failure, it's part of how we're built. And maybe real peace doesn't come from wanting more, but from wanting less. Or maybe it comes from learning to sit with the emptiness instead of running from it. That kind of awareness, even if it's uncomfortable, can be powerful. Once we understand that the next goal won't fix the hole we feel inside, we can stop sprinting towards it. We can breathe. We can, at last, look at the emptiness. And instead of fearing it, we can listen to it. Because sometimes, the silence that follows desire can tell us more about ourselves than any victory ever could. Living in society has brought us countless benefits. Safety, stability, progress, access to culture, and scientific advances. But the price of civilization has never been cheap. For Freud, the cost of living together is paid with repression. And what we repress doesn't just disappear. He argued that in order to build collective life, we had to give up a significant part of our instinctual drives, especially those related to sex and aggression. That sacrifice, while necessary for order, also comes at a personal cost. In Civilization and its discontents, Freud gives us a bold diagnosis. The chronic dissatisfaction of modern people isn't a flaw in the system. It's an unavoidable consequence of the social contract itself. To make society work, we have to hold back our strongest desires, redirect our inner energy, and tame our instincts. The problem is, while this repression keeps society functioning, it turns into personal anxiety. We live stuck between two poles, the freedom of our desires and the demands of civilization. And this tension never fully goes away. From a young age, we're taught to control ourselves. A child who wants to bite, scream, touch, or take learns that not everything is allowed. There are rules, schedules, boundaries, and this is necessary. Without it, there would be no culture. But this kind of education has a side effect. Parts of who we are get pushed into the unconscious. And the unconscious, as Freud showed, doesn't stay quiet. It comes back in symptoms, dreams, slips of the tongue, anxieties and behaviors we can't fully explain. In modern life, this process has only intensified. We've never been more socialized, and yet we've never felt so internally fragmented. Our natural impulses are repressed, and on top of that, we're pressured to look happy, productive, and emotionally balanced. It's not enough to behave. We also have to perform a perfected version of ourselves. This doesn't just create frustration, it creates guilt. Desire, already repressed, now also becomes something to be ashamed of. Spontaneity becomes rare. Freud saw human suffering as structural, not just situational. Pain doesn't only come from external conditions, but also from the way we're shaped internally to survive in society. The pleasure principle, our natural tendency to seek immediate gratification, is constantly blocked by the reality principle. And this inner battle creates discomfort. Not because something's broken, but because it has to be that way. We're forced to sacrifice part of our nature to live among others. That doesn't mean Freud was promoting a life driven only by instinct. He understood that culture protects us from chaos, but he also saw clearly the price of that cultural progress. The more complex civilization becomes, the more repression is required. And the more we repress, the more distance grows between who we really are and the image we show to the world. This creates a divided self, torn between desire and rules, impulse and responsibility, the inner drive and the social mask. So what do we lose in this process? We lose spontaneity, we lose emotional depth, we lose our connection with the body, with real feelings, and we also lose the ability to tolerate discomfort as a normal part of life. In the name of social harmony, we become masters of self-control. But if that control isn't worked through, it becomes rigid. It turns into anxiety, into symptoms, into signs that our soul is tired of hiding from itself. Civilization promises protection, but it can't protect us from our own desires. That's why discomfort doesn't disappear, it just changes form. And Freud was one of the first to show that behind the appearance of normal life, there's always a hidden conflict, an internal struggle that each person carries in silence. Psychoanalysis was born from listening to that conflict. Its goal isn't to get rid of it, but to understand it, to bring it to light, and give it a voice. Today's culture, obsessed with performance, productivity, and positivity, only deepens this discomfort. Instead of embracing the conflict, it pushes it further down. Sexuality, anger, sadness, doubt, everything has to be cleaned up, filtered, hidden. There's no room for the shadow. And where there's no shadow, there's no truth. Freud didn't offer magic solutions. He didn't promise to cure human suffering, but he gave us something better, understanding. He showed us that discomfort isn't a personal failure. It's part of being human. That to suffer doesn't mean we're broken. It means we're alive. And maybe, instead of trying to erase discomfort, we should learn to talk to it. So the real question isn't, how do we get rid of discomfort? It's, how do we live with it in a more conscious, honest, and human way? We have to admit that we're not fully rational, that we're not just what we show on the surface, that behind our polished behavior, there's a soul, full of impulses, longings, and a deep need to be heard. In the end, what Freud offers us is a kind of ethical clarity, a way of looking inward without shame, of accepting conflict without pretending it's not there, of living not as someone chasing perfection, but as someone searching for understanding. And that search, even when hard, may be the most authentic thing we can do. Living each day like you're serving a sentence. Wake up, go to work, buy things, go to sleep. Repeat. A life with no questions, no reflection, no real presence. For many, that's modern life. A routine on autopilot, packed with obligations and distractions. But Camus saw something deeper and more dangerous in this way of existing. He saw it as a form of surrender. To him, living automatically is a disguised way of giving up on life, a kind of philosophical suicide. Camus starts from one core idea, the absurd. He defines it as the clash between our human need for meaning and the world's silence. We want to know why we're here. We crave purpose, answers, direction. But the universe offers no clear response. There's no script, no final explanation. And it's in that tension between our thirst for meaning and life's indifference that the absurd is born. For Camus, the most honest way to live is to face the absurd head-on without escaping into illusions. That takes courage. It demands radical awareness. But most people aren't ready to sit with that discomfort. And that's where philosophical suicide comes in. Not by physically ending one's life, but by mentally and emotionally checking out. One of the most common ways people do that is through automatic living. Camus noticed how many people live like machines, following routines, repeating behaviors, avoiding deep thought, work to buy things to forget, and life just slips by. This way of living doesn't always feel like suffering, but it's not truly living either. It's a middle ground, numb, dull, unexamined. And the scariest part? It's normal. It's accepted, even praised. People call it maturity or success. But deep down, it's a denial of what it means to be fully human. The danger of mechanical life is that it drains life of meaning. Constant repetition without thought or awareness disconnects us from ourselves. We act out of habit, never stopping to ask why. We accept ready-made answers. We follow rules without questioning. And slowly, we stop really living. Life becomes a checklist, a role, a duty. And when that happens, we're no longer confronting the absurd. We're ignoring it. But it doesn't go away. It waits. Camus believed ignoring the absurd just delays the inevitable confrontation. And the longer we delay, the more unbearable life starts to feel. Boredom creeps in. Apathy grows. Everything might look fine on the outside, but inside, there's emptiness. A sense that we're alive in a physical sense, but asleep in every other way. That's what philosophical suicide is. The death of thought, of wonder, of the desire to understand our own existence. So what's the alternative? Camus offers a different path. Revolt. Not violent revolt, but an inner rebellion. A refusal to give in to numbness. It's saying no to the absurd, but also saying yes to life, even without a final meaning. It's a conscious, courageous, creative way of living. To live lucidly, according to Camus, is an act of resistance. To know life has no clear purpose and still live with passion, dignity, and presence. That's true strength. His most famous example is the myth of Sisyphus, the man doomed to push a boulder up a mountain forever. For Camus, Sisyphus represents all of us, trapped in routine. But what makes Sisyphus powerful is his awareness. He knows the task is meaningless, but he keeps going, eyes open. He doesn't lie to himself. He doesn't give up. He faces reality. And that, Camus says, makes him free. This conscious rebellion is radical because it demands personal responsibility. To live unmechanically means making real choices. It means questioning your own values, your own habits, your own desires. It means waking up, being here. That's not always comfortable. But Camus believed it's the only honest way to truly live. The problem with mechanical life is that it steals our creativity. It reduces existence to a list of tasks. It kills curiosity. And when we stop asking questions, when we stop feeling amazed just to be alive, we lose something essential. Philosophical suicide doesn't come with a date or a ceremony. It happens quietly. Every day we choose not to think, not to feel, not to wonder. Camus reminds us, being alive is a miracle. Even in a world without guarantees, there's beauty, depth, and possibility. But we only see it when we open our eyes. when we refuse to sleepwalk through life, when we trade numbness for curiosity, routine for wonder, fear for creation. You don't need to quit your job or escape society. Camus's rebellion doesn't require burning everything down, just changing your inner posture. You can stay in your job, your city, your routines, but awake, aware, present. That's what breaks the cycle of philosophical suicide. That's what gives life a sense of meaning, not because it explains everything, but because it's being truly lived. Some people live as if they're always reacting to the world around them, to what others say, to what's expected of them, to what society defines as right, attractive, or desirable. But rarely do they take control of their own lives. Nietzsche called this kind of existence reactive. It's a way of living that doesn't create, it adapts. It doesn't affirm life. It follows along passively. At the core of this posture is a feeling Nietzsche saw as corrosive: resentment. The resentful person doesn't just suffer. They build their identity around their suffering. They hold on to their pain, their injustice, their wounds, and instead of turning that pain into strength, they use it to justify their inaction. For Nietzsche, resentment isn't just a passing emotion. It's a deep psychological mechanism. It's a reversal of values, a way of explaining personal failure by blaming the world, other people, or life itself. On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche explains how, historically, the weak, those who lack the strength to impose their will, created a moral system based on denying the power of others. Instead of saying, "I am strong," they said, "The strong are evil." Instead of admiring courage, they glorified meekness. This shift, according to Nietzsche, was the birth of a morality rooted in resentment, a system that attacks what it cannot become. Modern life, by its very nature, encourages this way of being. We constantly compare, judge, measure. Social media, public discourse, and consumer culture all feed this reactive posture. People don't act out of deep desire. They act to keep up, to please, to meet expectations. We've become experts at criticizing, commenting, reacting. But we've lost the ability to act from within. Nietzsche saw creation as the highest form of affirming life. To create isn't just to make something external. It's to live from your own source, to express who you are instead of shaping yourself to meet someone else's gaze. The creator, for Nietzsche, is the one who says yes to life, not because life is easy, but because they are strong enough to dance with the chaos. Creative living is free, intense, alive. Reactive living is restrained, bitter, stuck in the past. The resentful person always looks backward, obsessing over what they lost, what went wrong, what they didn't get. They turn pain into identity. Instead of asking, "What can I build?" they ask, "Who can I blame?" And since life never gives guarantees, there's always someone to hold responsible. Society, parents, luck, God. This mindset may be understandable. Suffering is real. But Nietzsche asks, what do you do with it? For him, the real question isn't whether you've suffered. It's whether you can transform that suffering into power, whether you can shape chaos into something meaningful, whether you choose to create rather than victimize yourself. That's the key difference between the reactive spirit and the Dionysian spirit. The reactive spirit avoids pain. The Dionysian embraces it. The reactive spirit shuts down. The Dionysian expands. In everyday life, reactive living shows up in many ways. The fear of failure, the need for constant approval, an obsession with the past, chronic complaining, destructive criticism, conformism. These are signs that someone has stopped living from their own strength. They live in response, not in action. And the more the modern world demands performance, the more people shut down, because the pressure from outside drowns out the voice inside. Nietzsche invites us to do the opposite, to look inward, to recognize our instincts, our desires, our energy, And, most importantly, to stop denying who we are. The resentful person denies their impulses because they don't know how to live them fully. The creator owns them, works through them, transforms them, turning pain into art, anger into thought, loneliness into strength. That's the path of affirmation. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or beyond man, isn't some perfect, godlike figure. It's simply someone who doesn't live reactively, but creatively. Someone who doesn't follow inherited values, but invents their own. Who doesn't blame life for being hard, but accepts it, contradictions and all. The Übermensch is the one who laughs at the absurd because they no longer need life to make sense. Their strength comes from within. This might sound radical, even extreme, but Nietzsche wasn't a moralist. He wasn't telling people what they should be. He was showing what they could be, if they had the courage to confront themselves. Life doesn't have to be a constant battle against others. It can be a space to create who you are. But that means letting go of victimhood, breaking the cycle of reactivity, and owning your existence. The question Nietzsche leaves us with is, brutally honest. Are you living from your own strength, or just reacting to the world? Are you building a life, or just trying not to fail? Are you moved by desire, or by fear? If modern life is defined by reactivity, resentment, and constant comparison, maybe the most powerful rebellion today is this: to create, not just in the artistic sense, but in the existential one. To create yourself, to reinvent, to affirm who you are, to stop watching life from the sidelines, and become the author of your own story. We're not always who we seem to be. From an early age, we learn to wear masks in social settings. We shape our behavior based on what others expect, adjust the way we speak, hide certain emotions, and silence parts of ourselves. In many ways, this is necessary to live in society, but when the mask becomes permanent, we lose something essential: our connection to who we really are. Carl Jung called this the persona complex, a kind of psychic armor that protects us, but can also trap us. To Jung, the persona is the social face of our personality. It's the role we play on the stage of life. We're teachers, students, doctors, parents, children, leaders, employees. And with each role comes a set of codes, behaviors, and expectations. The persona works like a filter between the individual and society. It helps us communicate, be accepted, and belong. But problems start when we fully identify with it. When we confuse the persona with our whole self, something breaks. We start living from a smaller version of ourselves, one that's been trimmed, polished, shaped to fit in, to avoid conflict, to look good. Authenticity gets replaced by performance. And behind that polished exterior, the self, our deeper, truer core, begins to fade away from our awareness. In today's world, this issue has only gotten worse. The pressure to fit in, to present a perfect image, has grown even more intense with social media and the culture of performance. We're surrounded by outside expectations. Be successful, attractive, smart, balanced, productive. The persona has gone from a social tool to a constant demand, and the more perfect the mask becomes, the more invisible the person behind it. Jung saw this imbalance as a major cause of psychological suffering. When the ego, the conscious part of our mind, identifies only with the persona, it loses touch with the self, which represents the full spectrum of the psyche, including the unconscious. The result? A feeling of emptiness, of being disconnected or unreal. People feel like something's missing, but they can't name it. They feel like they're acting, living, but not truly inhabiting their lives. This disconnect doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, through small daily compromises. The opinion we hold back to avoid tension, the desire we suppress out of fear of rejection, the sadness we cover up with a fake smile. Each choice seems harmless, until one day we look in the mirror and no longer recognize ourselves. Life turns into a series of performances, instead of a process of authentic self-expression. But Jung also saw this discomfort as an opportunity. The unease we feel from living behind a mask might be the beginning of an inner calling. According to Jung, the psyche naturally seeks wholeness. Even the parts of ourselves that we deny continue to exist in our dreams, our symptoms, our unconscious behavior. Eventually, they find a way to surface. Crisis, anxiety, burnout. Often these are signs that the persona can no longer carry the weight of our inner life. Reconnecting with the self takes courage. It's the path of individuation, Jung's term for the journey of becoming your true self. It doesn't mean abandoning our social roles, but putting them into perspective, realizing we're more than what we show the world, that we have a rich inner life waiting to be heard, that our emotions, desires, fears, and dreams, even the messy ones, are part of a deeper truth about who we are. Individuation isn't selfishness, it's a reconciliation with the soul. It's stepping out of autopilot and asking, who am I when no one is watching? What do I really want, not just what others expect of me? What parts of me have I forgotten, denied, or buried? This journey isn't quick or easy, but it's deeply transformative. Along the way, we often encounter the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected because they didn't fit into our persona. Feelings like anger, envy, vulnerability, contradictory impulses. Jung didn't see the shadow as bad, but as vital material for self-awareness. Integrating the shadow means realizing we're more complex than we'd like to admit. And that doesn't make us less human, it makes us more whole. Wearing masks might feel safe, but it's a sterile kind of safety. When we live only to be accepted, we stop truly loving ourselves. When we live only to meet expectations, we stop creating from within. And slowly, we lose our connection to what makes us unique. We lose our inner voice. Jung believed that the meaning of life isn't found in performing for the outside world, but in going deeper into ourselves. The self doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear it, we need to quiet the persona, at least now and then, to take off the armor, to allow ourselves to feel, to admit we don't have all the answers, to simply be. In the end, Jung's invitation is clear. Living with authenticity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And while the world may ask us to wear masks, it's our responsibility not to forget the face beneath them. We don't always notice when we start to disappear into the crowd. We follow trends, adopt popular opinions, repeat behaviors, and hide ourselves in the masses. Little by little, what's truly ours begins to fade. Our choices, our values, our desires. It's like we give up being someone just to become one more. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher considered the father of existentialism, deeply understood this human dilemma, the loss of the individual in the collective. To him, this wasn't just a social risk, it was a spiritual threat. Kierkegaard didn't write for crowds, he wrote for the individual. His greatest concern was with personal, inner, silent existence, the kind no one else sees, but that holds the essence of who we are. What does it mean to be me in a world that prefers us? What happens to freedom when we choose to dissolve into the group instead of carrying the solitude of an authentic choice? He believed that real life begins when a person recognizes themselves as unique and fully responsible for their choices. And that's terrifying, because with freedom comes anxiety. When we realize there's no fixed script, that we can't blame others or hide behind roles, we're faced with the full weight of being free. And many people would rather run from that. The crowd offers comfort. It hands us ready-made identities, standardized ideas, the safety of consensus. Being just like everyone else takes the pressure off. But that relief comes at a cost, the loss of depth in the self. Kierkegaard saw this as a hidden form of despair, a kind of despair that doesn't always show up as visible pain. but as a dull, indifferent, shallow life. The person absorbed into the crowd may not suffer in obvious ways, but they stop living with authenticity. To Kierkegaard, living authentically means being aware of your own existence. It's seeing freedom not as a burden, but as a calling. It takes courage to make choices with no guarantees, to embrace the paradox of being human, that we are finite, yet full of possibility. It also means being willing to take risks, to go against the majority, to make mistakes on your own terms. Modern life, with its obsession with conformity, speed, and superficiality, makes this path even harder. We're constantly exposed to mass opinions, shaped by algorithms and seduced by ideas of success. And without realizing it, we start to adapt, not out of malice, but out of inertia. We stop asking, what do I really want? Instead, we go with the flow. The world says, this is right, this is beautiful, this is desirable, and we follow, even when something inside us screams otherwise. Kierkegaard didn't blame society itself, but rather how the individual relates to it. It's possible to live in the world without getting lost in it, but that only happens when there's a continuous effort to return to your center, an effort to listen inwardly. And he knew that wasn't easy, because inner silence can be disturbing. When all the outside voices quiet down, we're left face to face with ourselves, and sometimes we don't like what we see. That's when anxiety shows up, not as a disorder, but as a sign that we're waking up. Anxiety is the discomfort we feel when we realize we're free, that we have infinite possibilities ahead of us, and that by choosing one, we're giving up all the others. Yes, that brings fear, but also potential, because choosing is what makes us truly human. Freedom without awareness becomes an illusion, and the crowd gives us an easy escape to live without truly deciding. Just repeat, just obey. But the price is high. You become a reflection of the world, not an expression of yourself. You live like you're playing a part, maybe a well-executed one, but soulless. And over time, that lack of inner connection leads to a deep exhaustion, an emptiness we don't always know how to name. Kierkegaard offered a way out, a return to inwardness, a relationship with your true self, and for him, with God. Even for those who don't share the religious side, the message still holds. We need to reclaim our lost depth, to return to being the author of our own story. That takes time, silence, and inner listening. It means accepting the discomfort of not having all the answers, and above all, accepting the responsibility of living authentically. From Kierkegaard's perspective, being an individual doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means being in the world with awareness. It means participating in society without dissolving into it. It means talking to others without losing your own voice. It's about finding a balance between belonging and freedom, between connection and solitude. The crowd attracts us because it offers certainty, but the truth of existence lives in uncertainty. And that's where real freedom begins. The kind that lets us make mistakes, change, mature, grow. Kierkegaard didn't want us to abandon the world. He wanted us to fully inhabit our lives with courage. In the end, the question he leaves us with is powerful. Are you living as an individual, or just filling a space in the crowd? Are you choosing, or just following? Are you building a life, or just staying busy? At first glance, freedom seems like the best thing anyone could want. To live without constraints, choose your own path, and build your own future. But for Jean-Paul Sartre, freedom isn't an easy blessing. It's a burden, an existential weight that, instead of bringing peace, can plunge us into deep anxiety. Being free, for him, isn't about doing whatever you want in a carefree, spontaneous way. It's about being radically exposed to the responsibility of existing. Sartre starts from a blunt observation. Human beings are condemned to be free, not because freedom is some kind of punishment, but because it's unavoidable. We can't escape making choices. Even refusing to choose is still a choice. We are the authors of our own lives, whether we like it or not. And that's exactly what causes anxiety. There's no script, no pre-written meaning, no built-in essence telling us who we should be. For Sartre, existence precedes essence. That means humans are born without a preset purpose. Unlike an object, like a knife, which is made specifically to cut, a person exists first and then has to define who they are. There's no instruction manual, no divine essence, no fixed human nature to guide us. Everything is open, and that openness is both liberating and terrifying. This radical freedom puts us face to face with a task that many avoid: creating our own meaning. In a world without ultimate guarantees, we alone are responsible for everything we do, and for everything we don't do. That responsibility is what triggers anxiety, because once we realize that nothing is predetermined, and that everything depends on us, we feel the weight of the void. Freedom stops feeling empowering and becomes a kind of inner battleground. Sartre called this feeling nausea, a deep discomfort in the face of life's lack of ultimate justification. The realization that things just are, with no final reason behind them. That we're here, thrown into the world, and it's up to us to decide what to do with that fact. Nausea reflects the absurd, but unlike Camus, who responded to the absurd with rebellion, Sartre calls us to action. For him, running from freedom is bad faith, lying to ourselves, pretending we're just victims of circumstance. Bad faith, one of his key ideas, is the attempt to hide from freedom. It's when someone clings to a fixed role, hides behind social labels, and pretends they have no choice. It's the waiter who acts like being a waiter is his entire identity. It's the student who says, "I have to study," without realizing that studying is a choice. For Sartre, bad faith is how we protect ourselves from the anxiety freedom brings. But it also dehumanizes us. Modern life only amplifies this conflict. We're overwhelmed with choices: what to study, what to wear, who to date, what career to follow, what to believe. Freedom has become a product, a slogan, a marketing promise. But rarely are we taught how to handle the weight that comes with it. The result is a generation drowning in possibilities, but paralyzed by them. Too many options without inner direction leads to despair. Freedom, instead of empowering, begins to suffocate. Sartre saw this clearly, but never backed down. For him, the answer wasn't to run from freedom, but to embrace it fully. Even if it's painful, even if there are no easy answers. Authenticity, in this context, is an act of courage, recognizing that we are truly alone in our existence and still moving forward. It's about inventing a life that has value, not because someone told us so, but because we chose it. That doesn't mean living selfishly or in isolation. In fact, Sartre believed that when we choose our actions, we're also shaping the kind of humanity we value. By choosing myself, I choose man. Every personal decision is also a kind of statement about the world we want. There's an ethic inside freedom. We can't hide behind excuses like, "That's just who I am," or "That's life." We're always co-creating the world we live in. That's why the anxiety freedom causes shouldn't be avoided. It should be understood as a sign of life, of awareness, of consciousness. Anxiety isn't a sickness. It's the side effect of waking up. It forces us to move, to choose, to create. And in that process, we discover a kind of meaning that doesn't come from outside, but is born from our engagement with existence itself. Sartre doesn't offer easy comfort. He shows us the abyss and invites us to cross it on our own feet. His philosophy is demanding but deeply human, because at its core, it acknowledges something we've all felt. Freedom can hurt, but it's what makes us real. It pulls us out of the state of being a thing and brings us back to being a subject, a true self. In the end, the question isn't whether we are free. The real question is, what will we do with that freedom? There's a kind of person who doesn't want anything more than comfort. They avoid pain at all costs, reject any effort that involves risk or sacrifice, and live off small pleasures and big fears. They don't want to question, to create, or to grow. All they want is peace, safety, and stability. This is the last man, a figure created by Nietzsche as a warning, not an ideal. The last man represents what we become when we give up on greatness in exchange for a comfortable life. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche presents this image provocatively. The last man doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't love or hate, doesn't take chances. His life is shallow, predictable, and perfectly managed. He never feels deep pain, but never real joy either. He's someone who blinks, indifferent, passionless, satisfied with mediocrity. His motto could be, better a bit of guaranteed comfort than the intensity of living. Nietzsche isn't talking about a specific social class or income level. He's describing a spiritual attitude, the attitude of someone who traded the risk of truly living for the numbness of routine. Someone who prefers surviving to actually living. The last man doesn't search for meaning, doesn't wrestle with moral dilemmas, doesn't create new values. He just adapts. And in doing so, he slowly empties himself. In Nietzsche's view, human beings were made to grow beyond themselves. Life, at its core, is driven by a will to power, a creative, affirming force that pushes us to evolve, to challenge limits, to transform ourselves. But the last man denies that energy. He wants peace, but a sterile kind of peace. He wants security, and pays for it with the loss of his soul. By avoiding pain, he also closes off the path to greatness, because it's through struggle that we reveal our true strength. Pushing through suffering, committing to something that demands sacrifice, standing for values that don't offer instant rewards. All of that shapes our character and gives life depth. When we avoid all discomfort, we also avoid growth. We become shallow, fragile, numbed. Nietzsche saw this trend taking over modern life. Traditional religion was losing its grip. Big collective projects were falling apart. Nihilism, the sense that nothing really matters, was spreading like a silent fog. And in this vacuum, people started reaching for comfort, material things, distractions, a neatly controlled lifestyle. Instead of confronting emptiness head-on, they filled it with cheap pleasures, consumerism, status, entertainment. But none of that answers the real question: why live at all? The last man avoids that question. He prefers not to think. He wants to feel good, not be true. He wants to be safe from suffering, not understand it. And that's why he gives up the deepest kind of freedom. The freedom to become who he really is. Nietzsche sees this type of person as alive on the outside, but dead inside. Because where there's no challenge, there's no intensity. Where everything is comfortable, nothing is meaningful. Where everything is predictable, the human spirit fades. This isn't just an attack on comfort. Nietzsche wasn't saying we should seek pain for its own sake. What he criticized was reducing life to a constant effort to avoid discomfort. He wanted to restore the tragic dimension of life, not as pessimism, but as a celebration of life in all its rawness. With pain, yes, with doubt and failure, but also with courage, elevation, and creativity. Nietzsche's alternative to the last man is the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or beyond man. It's not a superhero or unreachable ideal, but someone who lives intensely, who embraces the weight of freedom, who creates their own values. Someone who confronts suffering without giving in, who transforms pain into power, who doesn't run from life, but faces it head-on. It's the person who says yes to existence, even when it hurts. The choice between the last man and the overman is one we face every day. When we avoid conflict that could make us stronger, when we stay silent in the face of injustice to keep things comfortable, when we pick the easy way just to avoid failing, we're blinking like the last man. we're shrinking from our own potential. Nietzsche invites us to do the opposite, to live with courage, to accept the uncertainty of life, to choose depth over ease, to seek greatness, not in ego or fame, but in integrity, boldness, and authenticity. Being great, for Nietzsche, means being loyal to who you really are, even if it brings pain, because that pain is what transforms us. It's what reveals us. It's what pushes us beyond who we are now. In the end, Nietzsche leaves us with a question that's both simple and devastating. Are you becoming someone, or just trying to stay safe from life? Are you creating a life worth living, or just hiding behind the illusion of security? The last man has already made his choice, but you still have time to choose differently. We live in a time that worships performance, constant doing, visible results, a flawless image. We're judged by productivity, appearance, and social relevance. In this environment, showing any sign of weakness, doubt, or complexity feels risky. That's exactly why entire parts of our inner world get pushed into the unconscious. Carl Jung called this hidden part of the soul the shadow. Everything we are but don't show. Everything we've avoided or buried out of fear or shame. The shadow isn't necessarily evil. More often, it's simply what's been rejected. It's our impulses, desires, feelings, talents, and emotions, parts of us that were censored because they didn't fit into what society, family, or culture expected. The child who learned not to cry, the teenager who hid their sensitivity, the adult who never dared to dream beyond the safe path. Each of these suppressions builds the shadow layer by layer. The performance-driven culture makes this worse. It demands we be upbeat, functional, and efficient. There's no space for deep questioning, silent pauses, or the kind of failure that helps us grow. Inner life becomes secondary. The inner voice is silenced in favor of a polished public image. And the more we drift away from who we really are, the more we feel a kind of emptiness we can't quite name. A tiredness that isn't physical, a sadness with no clear reason, a dissatisfaction that lingers, even when everything looks good on the outside. For Jung, this emptiness is the echo of the unlived parts of our soul. It doesn't come from a lack of success, but from being disconnected from the full reality of who we are. We're trained to show only the good parts, the admirable, productive, socially acceptable version of ourselves. But the soul doesn't want to be split. What we repress doesn't disappear, it hides. And eventually, it comes back, in dreams, in anxiety, in emotional breakdowns that seem to come out of nowhere. Jung believed real psychological health comes from confronting the shadow, and that's not easy. It takes courage to face what we've avoided, to look at buried emotions, denied traits, forgotten potential. It means facing the fear of rejection and the fear of losing control. But it's also the only way to live a more honest, fulfilling life. Because the shadow doesn't just hold darkness, it holds life force that we've abandoned. How many times have we swallowed our anger just to seem nice? How often have we buried sadness because we felt we had to keep going? How often have we faked enthusiasm when all we wanted was silence? Every one of these moments strengthens the persona, the social mask we wear to survive in the world. But it also pushes us further from the self, the deeper center of the psyche that longs for wholeness. Modern culture doesn't encourage looking inward, quite the opposite. It pushes us outward, to be seen, to compare ourselves constantly, to chase an idealized life. And when we can't keep up, we feel shame. Instead of welcoming the pain, we try to hide it even more, with distractions, with busyness, with harder work. But the emptiness doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Jung didn't see the shadow as an enemy, but as a message, a call from the soul to reconnect with what's been lost. That doesn't mean we should act on every impulse, but we should listen. Maybe anger carries the seed of courage. Maybe sadness can lead us to deeper connection. Maybe fear is a signpost pointing towards self-awareness. Integrating the shadow is, in the end, about reconciling with who we really are. Many people burn out not because they do too much, but because they live too little. They live for appearances, for approval, for recognition. But deep down, something feels missing. And often, what's missing is the part of them that's been silenced. Jung once said, "What we do not face in ourselves will show up later as fate." In other words, what we repress ends up shaping our lives without us realizing it. It affects our decisions, our relationships, our fears. The path of individuation, a core idea in Jung's work, is the journey of integration. It's slow, deep, and never perfect. But through it, we start to become whole, not flawless, not ideal, whole, with light and shadow, with strength and vulnerability, with real self-awareness. That's the kind of wholeness that performance alone can never give us. Living under the rule of the persona, that polished, efficient, carefully crafted social identity, might work for a while, but it comes at a price. And that price is the life not lived. It's the loss of spontaneity. It's the soul dimming slowly over time. Reconnecting with the shadow is an act of existential courage. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can begin. Maybe it starts with a simple question. What part of me have I been avoiding? What part of me did I leave behind along the way? Maybe it starts by paying attention to our dreams, by facing emotions we've buried, by embracing the parts of ourselves we were taught to see as ugly or useless. Because, as Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In the end, the emptiness we feel might not mean we've failed. It might be our soul calling us back, not to perform, but to finally live. And that, as difficult as it is, might be the only way to feel whole again. For Nietzsche, truth wasn't some calm and comforting light. It was a burden, a sharp blade that, when seen without illusions, reveals the abyss of existence. Life, stripped bare, is chaos, pain, impermanence. It lacks any ultimate meaning. God is dead, old values have collapsed, and we're left facing a world that doesn't owe us purpose. And in the face of all that, human beings risk falling into nihilism, the feeling that nothing matters, that everything is pointless, that life is just enduring the weight of meaninglessness. But Nietzsche doesn't stop there. He offers a deeply human response to the abyss. Creation. We must create art so we don't die from the truth. This line isn't about running from reality. It's about facing it head-on. Because for Nietzsche, the tragic isn't hopeless despair. It's accepting suffering as part of life while still honoring its beauty. It means looking at chaos and, instead of denying it, shaping it through form, imagination, and art. The artist, in this sense, isn't someone who escapes the world, but someone who transforms it. From his early works, Nietzsche believed that the aesthetic drive was essential to the spiritual health of human beings. In The Birth of Tragedy, he praised ancient Greek art as the highest form of a culture that could face suffering without being destroyed by it. Greek tragedy, according to him, brought together the Apollonian, the force of order, beauty, and balance, with the Dionysian, the force of chaos, ecstasy, and surrender. It was in the tension between those two that life found its deepest meaning. So art, for Nietzsche, isn't meant to distract us. It's meant to lift us up. It allows us to give shape to pain, to create meaning where there is none, to carry the truth without being crushed by it. The artist is the one who stares into the absurd and answers with creation, who says, even if life has no inherent meaning, I choose to create. That choice is radical. It requires inner strength. It demands a will to power. In the modern world, where nihilism has become a quiet epidemic, this idea is more urgent than ever. We're surrounded by images, but rarely by true art. We're constantly stimulated, but rarely deeply moved. Mass culture often turns art into shallow entertainment. But Nietzsche reminds us that real art takes risk. It wounds, it exposes, it reveals, and at the same time, it heals. Not through comfort, but through meaning. That's why, for Nietzsche, art is humanity's true metaphysics. When all beliefs collapse, when all values fall apart, we can still create. We can still sing, paint, dance, write. We can still turn pain into beauty. And in that creative act, we reclaim the dignity of being alive. Not because life becomes explainable, but because, even without explanation, it can still be lived with intensity. Nietzsche saw the artist, and more broadly, the creator, as the model for the overman, Übermensch, someone who doesn't live by convention, but by affirmation. Someone who doesn't need absolute truths, because they've learned to live with uncertainty. Artistic creation becomes a form of spiritual freedom, a way of saying yes to life, even when it's brutal. This yes isn't naive, it's tragic. It knows pain, loss, failure, but refuses to give in. It creates through it. Art becomes the act of taking full ownership of one's existence, with everything it includes. It's resistance against emptiness. It's a response to the mediocrity of the last man, the one who only wants comfort and safety. The creator takes risks because they know that for life to be worth living, it has to be lived aesthetically. Nietzsche extended this creative ideal not just to artists, but to all human beings. Become who you are. This famous phrase isn't just about knowing yourself, it's about shaping yourself. To be human is to be unfinished. To live is to sculpt yourself like a work of art. Aesthetics, then, isn't just about outer beauty. It's a way of life, a style of living that turns everyday choices into a kind of poetry. Instead of being crushed by boredom, routine, or alienation, we can choose to live with art. That doesn't mean escaping reality. It means facing it with more awareness. It means looking at suffering and finding a spark of creativity inside it. It means living with elegance in the face of chaos. In this sense, to create is a spiritual act. For Nietzsche, the artist is the one who doesn't die from the truth, who doesn't drown in nihilism, who turns despair into dance, who builds meaning knowing the world doesn't offer any guarantees. And that, he believed, is the kind of posture we need to survive the crisis of modernity. When the gods go silent, when values collapse, art rises, not as a final answer, but as a flame that resists the darkness. Nihilism asks, why keep living? Art answers, because I can still create. And that answer, even without promises of salvation, is an act of courage. A testimony that the human spirit can go beyond despair, that it can reinvent itself inside the abyss. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to believe in illusions. He challenges us to live creatively within reality, and that's what makes his philosophy so vital today. In the end, maybe creating is the last true act of freedom, and maybe it's also the most powerful. We live in a time that worships what can be measured, explained, and quantified. Reason has become the gold standard for defining reality. Anything that can't be scientifically proven is often treated with suspicion or outright dismissed. But in this obsession with logic and proof, we've lost something essential, our connection with the unconscious. And with that, we've lost our intimacy with symbols, myths, dreams, and the mysteries that nourish the human soul. Carl Jung saw this as one of the great tragedies of modern life. For Jung, the unconscious isn't just a place where we bury repressed thoughts. It's a living ocean of archetypal images, deep psychological forces, and primal content that shapes who we are. It's not something dark or pathological. It's a vital part of the psyche. The unconscious is the source of dreams, intuition, creativity, and profound insight. It's where the archetypes live. Those universal images and themes that speak directly to the soul, no matter the time or culture. In the past, Myths and rituals served as bridges between the conscious mind and the unconscious. They gave life, deep symbolic meaning. The hero facing the dragon, the cycle of death and rebirth, the journey of transformation. These weren't just stories. They were soul maps. They helped guide us, heal us, and connect us to something bigger than ourselves. But as rationalism and modern science took over, those maps were tossed aside as fantasy. Myth became superstition. Symbols lost their transformative power. The soul was replaced by the brain. And mystery, instead of being embraced, was avoided, as if anything we couldn't logically explain wasn't worth paying attention to. This break from the unconscious has serious consequences. When rational thinking represses symbols and myths, we lose the language of the soul. We disconnect from what's most ancient, most wise, and most instinctive inside us. And that's when the emptiness begins. Not the emptiness of having nothing, but the emptiness of lacking meaning. Life turns into a list of tasks, goals, and statistics, but it feels shallow. It lacks soul. It lacks depth. Jung saw this emptiness as a symptom of collective imbalance. Our modern world has grown outward, more tech, more speed, more progress, but it has neglected the inner world. And when the unconscious is ignored, it doesn't just disappear. It comes back in emotional crises, in strange symptoms, in compulsive behaviors, in anxiety with no clear cause. What isn't acknowledged eventually returns as fate. In dreams, in slips of the tongue, in strange impulses, the unconscious tries to speak. But we often don't listen. We're too busy, too fast, too distant from our inner world. And so, we keep piling up unresolved experiences, unhealed traumas, unprocessed emotions, unlived potential. All of that sinks into the unconscious and becomes what Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to see, but that shape us anyway. For Jung, reconnecting with the unconscious is one of the most important steps toward living a truly human life. It doesn't mean abandoning reason. It means balancing it. Reason should serve the whole self, not rule over it like a tyrant. Human beings aren't made only of clear thoughts. We're made of living symbols too. Symbols are the natural language of the unconscious. They're not just random signs. They hold layers of meaning, deep emotion, and archetypal energy. A symbol can heal, not because it explains, but because it reaches us in a way that logic can't. It brings order to inner chaos, but without strict control. It reveals things without needing to dissect them. As Jung said, a symbol is the best possible expression for something we haven't fully understood yet. In today's society, where everything has to be useful and efficient, symbolic language has lost its place, but the soul still longs for it. That's why, even in this age of technology, more people are turning to spirituality, mysticism, and the esoteric. The soul can't live on the surface. It needs depth. It needs story. It needs connection to the unseen. Jungian psychology offers a path back to that lost dimension, and that path begins with listening. Listening to our dreams, paying attention to synchronicities, reading myths not just as old stories, but as mirrors of the soul, meditating on archetypal images, being open to what life is trying to tell us in ways that aren't logical, but are deeply true. Humans, Jung said, have an inner need for meaning. And that meaning doesn't come only from facts or theories. It comes from integrating the conscious with the unconscious, from bringing together what we know with what we sense, from joining reason with mystery. When those two sides meet, life becomes more whole, more vivid, more real. In our quest to control and explain everything, we've forgotten that some things aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be lived, to be felt, to be honored. Mystery isn't a failure of knowledge. It's the fullness of it. It's the space where the soul breathes, where life stops being a problem and becomes a presence again. Reconnecting with the unconscious might be one of the biggest spiritual challenges of our time. Not because the unconscious went anywhere, but because we did, and it's still there, waiting for us to slow down, to listen, to dream again. Because in that deep, symbolic space within us, we rediscover who we really are. What if one day you stopped everything and simply asked, what does it mean to just be? This question, so simple and yet so profound, has almost vanished from our lives. It's been buried under goals, tasks, bills, notifications, and endless responsibilities. Modern life doesn't invite reflection. It demands constant action. And in this forgetting, many people feel a deep emptiness they don't know how to name. For the 20th century German philosopher Martin Heidegger, this loss of connection to the question of being was the greatest tragedy of modern existence. Heidegger wasn't interested in abstract theories. His focus was clear and direct. What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to be human, in the world, in time, facing death? The problem, he said, is that we've gotten used to living as if being is obvious. But it's not. And by assuming we already know what it means to exist, we stop truly asking, wondering, and contemplating. We've traded philosophical awe for well-managed routines. In today's world, everything revolves around having success, having control, having results, but being, that deep inner aliveness that comes before any title or identity, is slowly fading. We start defining ourselves by what we do and what we own. Who are you becomes what do you do? And when being gets reduced to performance, it loses depth. Heidegger called this the forgetting of being, a kind of collective amnesia about who and what we really are. Not because we've lost something physical, but because we've stopped listening. We're always rushing toward the next thing, the next task, the next goal, the next worry. And in this anxious forward motion, we lose the ability to truly be present. We stop actually being here. To describe this unique human condition, the way we exist in the world, Heidegger used the term Dasein, which literally means being there. Dasein is the kind of being that knows it exists and knows it will die. That awareness gives us the chance to live an authentic life. But authenticity takes presence. It takes listening. It takes the courage to ask not just how to live, but why and for what. Our culture doesn't encourage this kind of reflection. The constant flood of information, the pressure to produce, and the obsession with performance pull us away from what really matters. Life turns into management, and the more we manage, the less we actually experience. Life becomes automatic, maybe efficient, but emotionally empty. The result is a kind of blurry discomfort, a sense of disconnection, a quiet sadness, a low-level existential boredom. People feel like strangers to themselves. They have everything, but don't know what they're looking for. They're always busy, but never truly present. And over time, this distance from our inner selves turns into a deep void. Heidegger believed there was a way to reverse this, but not with a quick fix or a technical answer. He spoke about returning to silence, to listening for being, to moments of deep reflection. He called us to seek meaning not in easy answers, but in asking deeper questions, to live not just as problem solvers, but as people who dwell in the mystery of life. For him, anxiety was a sign of awakening. Unlike fear, which has a clear cause, anxiety has no specific object. It appears when the ground beneath our certainties disappears. And in that emptiness, being can finally show itself. Anxiety reminds us that we are finite, vulnerable, and therefore capable of living with real depth. Existence isn't a fixed fact. It's an ongoing invitation to be, to become, to open up to mystery. Heidegger believed that art, especially poetry, was one of the highest ways to reveal being. The poet doesn't explain the world, they rename it. They give words back their original weight. They help us remember what we've forgotten. Because for Heidegger, true language isn't just a tool, it's a home. It's where being lives. In this sense, asking about being is an act of resistance. It's refusing to let usefulness and productivity be the only values that matter. It's allowing ourselves to stop, to be silent, to wonder, to listen. It's making space for what can't be measured, but can be deeply lived. And maybe that's what's missing most in today's world. Less fixing, more meaning. The forgetting of being isn't just a philosophical mistake. It's a spiritual crisis. And healing begins in the pause, in the listening, in the willingness to sit with the emptiness without rushing to fill it. Because, as Heidegger said, only when we're able to truly ask the question of being do we begin to truly dwell in the world. In many ancient cultures, no one became a true adult without first going through an initiation rite. These were symbolic moments, often painful, solemn, or mysterious, where a person left one stage of life behind and was reborn into another. Childhood gave way to maturity. The naive ego gave way to the recognition of the shadow. Belonging to the tribe made space for the rise of the individual. For Carl Jung, the absence of these rites in modern society is at the root of a deep psychological immaturity. We keep aging on the outside, but never cross the symbolic thresholds that allow us to mature on the inside. Jung saw human life as a continuous process of individuation, the journey of becoming who we truly are. But that journey requires transitions. It demands that we break away from old identities, confront our inner shadows, and accept suffering as an unavoidable part of life. In traditional cultures, this inner work was marked by ceremonies, myths, and trials. The community recognized and supported these turning points. Today, that space is gone. We live in an age where change happens fast, but rarely runs deep. We move from childhood to adolescence, from youth to adulthood, from adulthood to old age, but often without any symbolic awareness of those transitions. We graduate, get married, switch careers, have children. But all of it happens in the flow of everyday life, without pause, without ritual, without reflection. And what isn't symbolized isn't fully lived. We're left with the event, but miss the meaning. This lack of existential markers leads many adults to remain emotionally stuck in a childlike state. They constantly seek approval, avoid taking full responsibility for themselves, project their pain onto others, and fear confronting life's limits and death itself. Without initiation, they never learn to die to old versions of themselves, so they can't be reborn. They stay trapped in repetitive, confusing, and unfulfilling cycles. For Jung, this symbolic emptiness produces what he called the modern neurosis, a deep sense of unease without a clear cause, showing up as boredom, anxiety, or chronic dissatisfaction. The soul feels like it's not living its real story. Something is missing, a kind of meaning that can't come from external achievements, but only from inner transformation, the kind that traditional rites of passage once offered. These rites followed a universal pattern: separation, liminality, and reintegration. First, the person was separated from the group, pulled out of the normal flow of life. Then came a phase of challenge, where the familiar disappeared and the new hadn't yet arrived. It was a liminal space, an in-between world. Finally, after crossing through that space, the person returned transformed. Not the same, but renewed, more conscious, more whole, more real. This psychological process is still needed. It hasn't disappeared. But in the absence of community rituals, it now has to happen in solitude, often painfully, often without guidance. Crises of meaning, breakdowns, grief, illness, burnout, all of these can become modern initiation rites if we know how to face them. Pain, when understood and worked through, can change us, but only if we recognize its symbolic value. Jung believed that big soul transitions need symbolic language. Symbols allow the conscious mind to communicate with the unconscious. They help us move through experiences that logical language can't explain. That's why myths, stories, dreams, and archetypal images are so important. They point to something greater, not something to explain, but something to live. The absence of ritual also disconnects us from what Jung would call deep time. We live stuck in chronological time, clocks, schedules, productivity, but rites once connected us to kairos, soul time, the time of inner transformation, of sacred moments. They pulled us out of linear life and into a space where the soul could breathe and renew itself. In the modern world, we try to replace rites with consumerism, institutional milestones, or flashy events. But that doesn't work. Buying a car, throwing a party, or getting a promotion doesn't replace the soul's symbolic work. We keep feeling incomplete and disconnected because the essential part of us hasn't been touched. The self, the inner wholeness we're meant to realize, is still waiting. Bringing back rites of passage doesn't mean copying old rituals or romanticizing the past. It means acknowledging our human need for conscious transformation. It could be a retreat, a period of silence, a personal journey, a hard decision, a life-changing experience. What matters is that there's a symbolic pause, a space where the old can die and the new can be born. Jung invites us to restore the symbolic dimension of life, to stop living only in the facts and start living in meaning, to not just move through life stages, but let them move through us, because only then does maturity go beyond age or experience and become maturity of the soul, a state where a person carries themselves with more truth, more responsibility, more calm. In the end, maybe the lack of initiation is one reason why so many of us feel like we haven't really started living. The soul is still waiting for its initiation, waiting for the moment we stop being only who we were and finally become who we were meant to be. You can have the latest smartphone, endless content at your fingertips, travel, clothes, apps that make your life easier, and still feel empty. That's becoming more and more common in today's world. We're surrounded by objects and promises of satisfaction, but instead of contentment, we often feel anxiety, exhaustion, and a kind of quiet boredom. For Schopenhauer, this isn't a coincidence. It's reality showing its true face beneath all the appearances. The happiness promised by consumption and technology is an illusion, a mask for the blind and endless force that drives us. According to the German philosopher, behind everything that exists lies an irrational, unconscious, and insatiable force, the will. It's not a thoughtful or purposeful will, it's pure, blind drive. It desires for the sake of desiring. It wants just to want. In humans, this shows up as a constant urge to chase, to conquer, to satisfy, but never to rest. Because as soon as one desire is fulfilled, another one takes its place. Life swings between pain and boredom, he writes. The pain of what we don't have, and the boredom of what we already got. The real issue is that modern culture, instead of facing this tragic truth, tries to cover it up. Instead of examining the root of human desire, it creates solutions that only feed the cycle. Consumption and technology become ways to keep the will busy, but not healed. We feed the machine instead of trying to step outside it. We buy, scroll, collect, but we rarely stop to ask, is this setting me free or making me more trapped? Technology, with all its speed, convenience, and distractions, looks like the perfect partner for happiness. But for Schopenhauer, technical progress doesn't fix our existential problem. It just reshapes it. We keep on wanting. We keep on feeling frustrated. We keep swinging between excitement and emptiness. The world is more connected, but not more reflective. More efficient, but not wiser. Full of means, but missing meaning. Instead of confronting the suffering that's built into existence, modern life teaches us to ignore it, to run from it, to numb ourselves with constant stimulation. But that comes at a cost. Without recognizing suffering as a basic part of reality, we build lives based on denial. We deny limits, we deny pain, we deny death, and in doing so, we lose depth. Schopenhauer believed that wisdom doesn't come from satisfying our desires, but from understanding and letting go of them. This doesn't mean violently repressing what we want, but calmly recognizing that chasing happiness in external things is a fundamental mistake. Peace doesn't come from more pleasure, but from quieting the urge that always wants more. He saw in aesthetic contemplation, in art, in philosophy, and in compassion, ways to temporarily pause the will. Rare moments when we step outside the cycle of desire and simply are, aware, still, free from restlessness. Take art, for example. To him, it was a kind of escape. When we listen to a symphony, or look at a landscape or a poem, we don't want to own them. We just want to experience them. And in that moment, the will is silent. The same thing can happen in meditation, in deep listening, in true presence. But all of this takes time, and today's culture teaches us to treat time like a resource to spend, not an experience to live. Consumer culture, on the other hand, sells us false promises of wholeness. We're constantly told, buy this and you'll be happy. Use this and you'll feel complete. But Schopenhauer saw it clearly. What's really being sold isn't the object. It's the fantasy of ending our pain. The problem is that relief never comes, because the will always find something else to want. And so we go on, stuck in a quiet spiral of chronic frustration. It takes courage to admit that the version of happiness sold in the market as something you can buy, package, or achieve doesn't actually exist. What exists are moments of relief, of beauty, of clarity. And, paradoxically, it's when we stop desperately chasing happiness that we begin to feel peace. A peace that isn't loud or flashy, but quiet and internal, built on accepting reality for what it is, imperfect, unstable, and limited. Schopenhauer wasn't an optimist, but he wasn't a pure nihilist either. He believed that compassion, the deep recognition of another person's pain, could free us from the ego-driven cycle of will. When we realize that everyone is stuck in the same loop of desire and disappointment, something in us softens. And in that moment, we can step out of the mindset of consumption and into the mindset of presence. Maybe the greatest tragedy of the modern world isn't pain, but our inability to face it. The way we run from discomfort, the panic we feel when the emptiness creeps in, the glow of store windows, of screens, of likes. All of it becomes a shiny veil that hides what matters most. The chance to look inside and honestly ask ourselves, what am I trying to avoid? Schopenhauer doesn't offer sweet promises, but he does offer clarity that can set us free. By showing us that consumption and technology are just stand-ins for the contemplation we've lost, he invites us back to what really matters. Silence, art, connection, and most of all, the truth about who we are. We don't always realize it, but a lot of what we think is just who we are is actually shaped by messages that came before us. We're born into a world that already decided what it means to be normal, healthy, productive, attractive, and desirable. We grow up hearing voices from school, religion, medicine, media, and science, all telling us who we should be, how we should act, and what we should feel. For Michel Foucault, this web of ideas doesn't just guide us, it deeply shapes us, and the less aware we are of it, the more we lose our inner autonomy. Foucault, one of the most thought-provoking thinkers of the 20th century, spent much of his work showing how power doesn't always come from force or control. It often works through much subtler means, the knowledge systems that shape how we think and live. He revealed that modern power is spread out, almost invisible, woven into institutions, social norms, and expert knowledge. And most of all, he showed that this power shapes our sense of self. It creates subjectivity. Foucault's big shift was this: modernity didn't set us free, it rebuilt us. Instead of free, spontaneous individuals who create ourselves, we've become normalized people, shaped by external standards. Medicine tells us what a healthy body looks like. Psychology tells us what acceptable behavior is. Education defines the ideal student. Marketing tells us what we should want, and without realizing it, we work hard to fit these images, thinking we're being free. Foucault didn't deny that knowledge has value, but he constantly pointed out how all knowledge is tied up with power. Whenever someone defines what's right or wrong, healthy or sick, useful or useless, that knowledge also excludes, labels and controls. Modern power doesn't need to silence people. It just needs to label them. It says, this is normal, this is productive, this is ideal. Everything else becomes invisible, shameful, or wrong. This kind of symbolic control is more effective than direct repression. Because people begin to police themselves, they internalize these messages, they feel guilty for not measuring up, they reshape themselves to fit the mold. Foucault called this biopower, the way modern power works from the inside out, managing life down to the smallest details. And in that process, our inner autonomy starts to erode. We no longer need an external guard. We become our own. We control our bodies, emotions, desires, and thoughts, not out of fear of punishment, but fear of not fitting in. Modern freedom often becomes conditional, the freedom to be what's already expected, and that leads to suffering, a quiet, disguised suffering, but real nonetheless. Foucault saw this system at work in schools, hospitals, prisons, factories, and the military. But in today's world, it's even more advanced. Social media, algorithms, entertainment, and the culture of performance all contribute to shaping who we are. Every like, every filter, every engagement metric reinforces what's acceptable, and people wanting approval keep adjusting themselves. What's most disturbing is that we go along with it willingly. We're not forced. We're seduced. We want to belong. We want to be seen. We want recognition. And in that perfectly normal desire, we often drift away from our true selves. We silence desires that don't fit the script. We ignore feelings that don't match the story. We hide pain in the name of maintaining an image. And the cost of that? A loss of soul, of authenticity, of depth. Foucault didn't offer a simple way out. He didn't believe in some true self hiding behind all the social masks, but he did believe in resistance. And for him, resistance starts with awareness. When we begin to see how we've been shaped, how certain messages and systems define us, we can start to shift them. We can question them, mess with them, invent new ways of being. This resistance doesn't have to be huge. Sometimes it starts with small things. Questioning a rule, rejecting a label, embracing your uniqueness. It's in those small acts of defiance that we start to build a more autonomous self. Not by completely escaping outside influence, that's impossible, but by engaging with it more consciously and creatively. Inner autonomy, in this context, isn't something we're born with. It's something we build. It takes reflection, courage, and a willingness to see the forces that are always trying to define us. It's choosing to live with the awareness that the world is constantly telling us who to be, and still trying to be more than those definitions. It's carving out silence in the middle of the noise. It's inventing ways of being that aren't pre-approved. Foucault believed that subjectivity was a battleground. It's not just passive, it's where power and freedom collide. That's why self-knowledge for him wasn't a narcissistic act. It was a political one. To know yourself is to understand the forces that shaped you, and to begin, little by little, to reshape how you live in the world. In the end, Foucault leaves us with a powerful question. Who would you be if you stopped trying to fit in? The answer might just be the beginning of your true freedom. He didn't look like a monster. He wasn't sadistic or insane. He was a soft-spoken, ordinary bureaucrat who claimed he was just following orders. When Hannah Arendt covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, she expected to see someone cruel, fanatical, or vicious. But instead, she saw a typical functionary, technical, obedient, unimaginative. Her philosophical breakthrough wasn't about monsters. It was about emptiness. Arendt called it the banality of evil, the idea that great evil can be carried out not through hatred but through a lack of thinking, through moral shallowness. This insight is devastating because it breaks the comforting belief that evil is always loud, obvious, or extreme. Arendt showed that evil can be quiet, boring, obedient, done without shouting or blood on anyone's hands. It can be committed by someone simply trying to do their job well without ever asking what that job actually involves. And that's what makes it so terrifying. The absence of thought where there should be responsibility. The banality of evil doesn't mean it's trivial. Arendt used that word to describe the lack of depth, the shallow way some people live, think, and act. Evil becomes banal when someone stops asking about the consequences of their actions, when morality becomes just a set of rules to follow, when reflection is replaced by automatic behavior. And this is where her insight directly connects with the modern world. Today, we live in a time where conformity and superficiality have become almost normal. Life moves fast, the culture of performance is everywhere, we're pressured to be productive and obsessed with our image. All of this pushes us to stay on the surface. Thinking takes effort. Asking hard questions is uncomfortable. So many people live in an ethical sleep. They follow rules, repeat what others say, share ready-made opinions, but they rarely stop to ask, is this right? Is this fair? Is this even mine? This lack of thinking isn't about lacking intelligence. It's about lacking a deeper kind of attention, the inner conversation we have with our own conscience. Arendt believed that thinking was a way to resist evil. Because thinking takes time, it requires stillness, inner conflict, and honesty. Most of all, it requires owning our choices, even when we're just doing our job. In today's world, where so many decisions are outsourced to algorithms, institutions, or experts, it's tempting to let go of responsibility. We follow routines, obey systems, click buttons. But if there's no thought, no questioning, no depth, we risk repeating what Eichmann did, acting without thinking, following without judgment, participating in harm by simply checking out morally. This ethical emptiness isn't just political, it's existential. When people settle for a shallow life, without self-examination, without purpose, without accountability, they start to feel a kind of emptiness that no distraction can fill. It shows up as moral boredom, quiet anxiety, a vague sense of not really being alive. And that, in turn, feeds even more detachment. Arendt believed that the ability to judge, not just follow rules or apply logic, is at the heart of our human dignity. To judge means more than knowing right from wrong. It's an inner process of discernment that requires empathy, memory, imagination. It means putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding the context, thinking about the consequences. It means thinking for yourself, even when no one else is. Without that, evil doesn't need to be chosen. It just slips through, by default. Her philosophy is a call for moral courage. Arendt believed that everyone has both the ability and the duty to think independently, to refuse indifference, to not cooperate with evil even under pressure. And that courage comes from being in touch with your own conscience, not some abstract moral code, but the living experience of thinking, judging, acting, and accepting the weight of your actions. In real life, that means rejecting comfortable conformity. It means being willing to stand alone, to say no when everyone else says yes, to tolerate the discomfort of going against the grain. That's what keeps ethics alive. Because as Arendt wrote, evil doesn't need passionate believers. It just needs people to stop thinking. Today, with technology, social media, and decision-making increasingly automated, the banality of evil has taken on new forms. It appears in hate speech passed off as memes, in anonymous cancel culture used as a blunt form of justice, in the exclusion of difference by algorithms that reinforce bubbles, in the silence of bystanders. Once again, the real danger isn't always cruelty, it's shallowness. Arendt invites us to show up in a deeper way, to live with awareness, to think with responsibility, to act with clarity. It's not about being a hero. It's about not being complicit. It's about remembering that ethical life begins where indifference ends, and that even in dark times, thought remains a space of freedom. In the end, the question she leaves us with echoes quietly. Are you thinking with your own mind, or just repeating what the world wants you to say? The answer isn't theoretical, it's practical. It's in the choices you make every day, and it might be the very thing that separates integrity from complicity. You don't need to leave your house to see the world. It's already on your screen, filtered, edited, sped up, and commented on. Every image, every post, every story seems to bring us something real. But at the core, what we're seeing is a representation. For Guy Debord, this isn't just a small detail of modern life, it's the very essence of it. We live in the society of the spectacle, where reality is no longer experienced directly, but consumed through images, and in that process, something essential is lost. The authenticity of experience. Published in 1967, The Society of the Spectacle could not be more relevant today. Debord predicted what has now become almost unavoidable. A way of living where people exist more to be seen than to truly feel. The spectacle, according to him, isn't just entertainment, it's a whole system that organizes how we live. Everything becomes performance. Politics becomes marketing. Intimacy becomes content. Experience becomes a product. Debord wrote, "Everything that was once directly lived has moved away into a representation." It's a harsh diagnosis. The more we surround ourselves with images, commercial, ideological, media-based, digital, the less contact we have with raw, living, silent reality. We watch travel videos instead of traveling. We look at idealized bodies instead of inhabiting our own. We follow lives that aren't ours, crave things we don't need, and believe what's repeated with a convincing aesthetic. This constant mediation has a deep effect. It strips away authentic experience. Real experience requires presence. It takes time, silence, and involvement. But the spectacle pulls us out of ourselves, pushing us to observe rather than live. It creates a distance between us and the world, a lens that beautifies, dramatizes, and controls. And the more we live through that lens, the more life slips through our fingers. The society of the spectacle also turns us into spectators of our own lives. We start seeing ourselves as images. We worry about how we're seen, how much engagement we get, what story we're telling about ourselves. And gradually, we stop living with depth and start performing. It's no surprise that so many people today feel tired, anxious, disconnected, even while constantly stimulated. The flood of images overwhelms the eyes, but leaves the soul empty. Debord saw this as a new kind of alienation. Not the alienation of the industrial worker that Marx talked about, but the alienation of a person drowning in appearances. The spectacle doesn't use force. It uses seduction. It entertains, distracts, fills up every empty space. Life becomes a series of scenes, but with no real presence. Reality stops being lived and starts being staged. This logic touches every part of life. At work, we wear masks of efficiency and control. On social media, we show curated versions of happiness, beauty, and success. In politics, speeches are designed for optics, not for truth. Even pain and vulnerability are turned into content, monetized for attention. Everything is spectacle, everything is image, but this comes at a high cost. The emptiness of the self. When everything must be shown, nothing is felt in private. When everything is posted, nothing remains sacred. And when validation always comes from the outside, the inner self loses its center. What should be shared becomes exposure. What should be a relationship becomes personal branding. Experience becomes product. This doesn't mean that all images are fake or that the digital world is automatically meaningless. The problem is when the image replaces connection, when representation takes the place of real experience, when how it looks becomes more important than how it feels. That's when life starts to resemble a beautifully lit stage, but with no one really living in it. Debord wasn't just a nostalgic critic dreaming of a time before technology. His critique was political, radical, and meant to wake people up. He wanted to expose a system that, by turning everything into a visual commodity, robbed people of their ability to truly be in the world. He called for people to break out of passive consumption and reclaim direct, unfiltered experience. Today, that warning rings louder than ever. With algorithms deciding what we see, influencers shaping what we want, and platforms turning our value into numbers, the spectacle has reached into every corner of life. But resistance is still possible. It's still possible to live without constantly watching yourself, to listen without recording, to cry without posting, to love without performing. The answer isn't to ditch all screens, it's to reclaim your inner experience, to reconnect with your body, with silence, with nature, with slow reading, with conversations that aren't recorded, with eye contact that doesn't need to be shared. To remember that before the image, there is life. And nothing, absolutely nothing, replaces the power of being fully present. Guy Debord gave us a warning that now sounds like a wake-up call. Don't get lost in the spectacle. Life still happens outside the display window, and maybe the greatest act of freedom is simply to be fully in what is real, in what is simple, in what is truly lived. Have you ever stopped to think about how often we define ourselves by what we have? We have a name, a degree, a job, a body, a style. Having has become the core of our identity. But does owning things, or even owning a lot, really make us feel more alive? For Erich Fromm, this confusion between having and being is one of the root causes of the modern existential crisis. We're surrounded by objects, achievements, titles, and yet we feel empty inside. Fromm, a psychoanalyst and social philosopher, believed there are two fundamental ways of being in the world: the mode of having and the mode of being. The first is centered on possession, accumulation, and control. The second focuses on presence, experience, and authenticity. Our culture, he argued, has been shaped for centuries by the value we place on having wealth, having power, having knowledge, having status. And being, with all its depth and vulnerability, has been pushed aside. In the having mode, everything becomes an object: other people, nature, time, even our own lives. We start to view the world not as something to connect with, but as something to conquer, own, or use. Without even realizing it, we apply the same logic to ourselves. We start to believe we are what we possess. And when we lack something, we feel like we are nothing. But here's the problem: nothing we have truly belongs to us. Everything can be lost, broken, or replaced. And when our identity is built on what we own, we live in constant fear. Fear of losing it, fear of not having enough, fear of being forgotten. Having is never satisfied. It always wants more. And the more we have, the more we cling to it. The more dependent we become, the more fragile we are in the face of change. Being, on the other hand, doesn't aim to collect things. It aims to experience, to feel, to connect. Being isn't about performance, it's about presence. It's being deeply engaged with reality, with others and with ourselves. It's loving without owning. It's learning without dominating. It's living without controlling. That's why it's lighter, but also braver. Because being requires letting go. It requires vulnerability. It requires trusting the flow of life. Modern culture, however, praises those who have, not those who are. From a young age, we're taught to compete, to collect achievements, to show results. School rewards grades, not the learning process. The economy measures productivity, not humanity. Social media values visibility, not depth. And in this environment, being starts to fade. It hides behind the masks we wear to appear like something we're not. Fromm saw this as a deep alienation of the human spirit, a disconnection from our most essential nature. Humans, he believed, have a deep need for meaning, love, and creative expression. But we try to fill that need with consumption, status, and distraction. But the emptiness inside can't be filled with objects. In fact, the more we accumulate without purpose, the farther we drift from ourselves. The result is a kind of emptiness, one that shows up as anxiety, loneliness, shallow relationships, and the inability to just be in silence. People rush around, buy things, work, post online, but feel disconnected, because being isn't found in noise and performance. It's found in silence and connection. And to rediscover being, we have to slow down, breathe, listen, let go of the excess. Fromm wasn't against material things. He didn't believe poverty was a moral virtue. What he criticized was the obsession with ownership as a measure of worth. What he proposed was an inner revolution, putting being at the center of life. That means changing how we relate to everything: time, people, nature, even our own bodies. It means living with more awareness, more love, and more presence. In love, for example, the having mode says, "You are mine." The being mode says, "I connect with you in freedom." In learning, having says, "I know this. I have a degree." Being says, "I'm learning. I'm growing." At work, having is only about money or status. Being seeks purpose, contribution, and expression. This shift is simple, but radical, because it goes against an entire system built on the logic of having. A system that keeps us insecure, always comparing, always consuming. A system that turns people into consumers and the world into a storefront. But when we step away from that logic, something begins to bloom. Something you can't buy, can't post, can't measure. The inner peace of living in tune with who you really are. According to Fromm, the great challenge of modern life is to reclaim the ability to be, not just to exist biologically, but to live with depth, to be whole, to be with others, to be in the world. And that takes courage, the courage to swim against the current, to let go of what's superficial in order to find what's essential, the courage to abandon the illusion of having and embrace the realness of being. In the end, Fromm leaves us with a powerful question. Are you living like someone who has things, or like someone who is someone? The answer doesn't come from words, but from how we choose to live our time, our relationships, and our inner life. Because real freedom isn't about owning the world, it's about being fully alive in it. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with this reflection to the end. We're living in a time where thinking deeply is a form of resistance, and it means a lot to share that journey with you. If this content resonated with you, made you see things differently, or feel something more deeply, go ahead and like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment. Your voice matters and helps keep this space alive. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. Every week, we meet here to reflect, with honesty, clarity, and courage. There's a lot more content waiting for you. Stick around, pick your next video, and let's keep diving deeper into life together. See you next time.